Nancy sits stunned as the finance VP announces salary freezes during the quarterly all-hands meeting. When her name is specifically mentioned for setting unrealistic expectations, despite saving the company with the Centauri contract, her hands begin to shake. 10 years of dedication reduced to public humiliation. That night, she finds the Centauri contract clause her attorney friend once called nuclear. By morning, Nancy packs her badge and laptop. At 6:59 a.m., she walks into the emergency board meeting with a single slide. Asset seizure clause. Cross. Default. The CFO's face goes white. I joined TechSphere right out of graduate school, with stars in my eyes and big dreams of changing the world through innovative software solutions. For 10 years, I poured my heart and soul into my role as a product manager, working my way up to senior level through consistent results and unwavering dedication. My colleagues often joked that I should have a cot in my office considering the late nights I pulled, especially during critical product launches. Last year, our company faced a financial crisis that threatened our very existence. Revenue had plummeted, and rumors of layoffs filled the hallways like a toxic fog. As panic spread, I identified an opportunity with Centauri Systems, a Fortune 500 company, looking for exactly the kind of enterprise solution we specialized in. While others were updating their resumes, I was building a proposal that could save us all. "Nancy, this is a long shot," my boss, Frank, had said, leaning against my office door frame with his signature skeptical expression. "Centauri works with companies 10 times our size. They'll never take us seriously." "They will if we show them what we can deliver," I countered, pushing aside the presentation I'd been refining until 3 a.m. "Their current vendor is failing them. I've done the research." Frank simply shrugged and walked away. That was his management style, minimal involvement, until success was certain, then suddenly appearing front and center to collect the accolades. Despite the lack of support, I canceled my planned vacation to the Grand Canyon and worked through a bout of pneumonia to perfect our pitch. The Centauri contract was worth $40 million, enough to stabilize TechSphere for years. When we finally secured the deal after 3 rounds of grueling negotiations, the entire company celebrated. CEO Melissa personally stopped by my desk. "This is extraordinary work, Nancy. You've saved us all. I'll make sure you're properly rewarded when we're back on solid ground." The promise of recognition felt well-deserved after all I'd sacrificed. There were explicit talks of a promotion to VP of Product, an equity refresh, and a leadership role on our executive committee. For once, I allowed myself to believe my dedication would be properly acknowledged. 6 months later, TechSphere's financial reports showed we were thriving again. The stock price had recovered, and executive retreats to luxury resorts resumed. Yet when I asked Frank about the promised promotion and compensation adjustment, he became evasive. "We need to focus on deliverables first. The Centauri implementation is still underway. Let's revisit this conversation next quarter." Next quarter became next fiscal year, and still nothing changed. I continued leading the Centauri relationship flawlessly, ensuring every milestone was met or exceeded. Then came yesterday's quarterly all-hands meeting. I sat in my usual spot, 3rd row center, laptop open and ready to take notes. The finance VP, a stern woman named Veronica, who rarely interacted with anyone outside the executive floor, took the stage with an expression that immediately sent a chill through the room. "In light of current market conditions, the executive committee has decided to implement a temporary salary freeze," she announced. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. "Additionally, we've identified certain team members who will remain at their current compensation levels indefinitely due to performance concerns." My stomach tightened as I glanced around the room. Who could possibly be underperforming? Our metrics were better than ever, Veronica continued, her voice cutting through the tension. These individuals have been setting unrealistic expectations and failing to meet standard deliverables. She clicked to the next slide, and there was my name, projected 10 feet tall alongside 3 others. The blood drained from my face. My hands began to shake so violently I had to close my laptop. 10 years of dedication, countless weekends sacrificed, the $40 million contract that saved the entire company, all reduced to public humiliation. As coworkers avoided eye contact, I sat frozen, barely hearing the remainder of the presentation. Afterward, Frank approached with a practiced look of concern that never reached his eyes. "This isn't personal, Nancy. The decision came from above. You know how these things work." I nodded mechanically and returned to my desk, feeling simultaneously numb and hyper-aware of the whispers around me. That evening, I stayed late, waiting until the office emptied. With hands still trembling, I pulled up the Centauri contract, all 800 pages of it, and began searching for something, anything, that might make sense of what had happened. Near midnight, I found an email accidentally left in a shared folder. It was from Veronica to the executive team, dated 3 weeks earlier. Nancy Anderson's scheduled compensation adjustment has been reallocated to the Q3 executive retreat budget. Her performance review has been modified to support this decision. Frank has been informed and is on board. I stared at the screen, my shock morphing into something harder, colder. They hadn't just denied me what I'd earned, they'd deliberately manufactured a reason to do it. As dawn approached, I remembered something my friend Stephanie from legal had mentioned when we finalized the Centauri deal. "This cross-default clause is nuclear," she had said, pointing to a dense paragraph on page 620. "Let's hope we never need it." I pulled up the section and began reading with new eyes. By morning, I understood exactly what it meant and what I needed to do. I packed my badge and laptop into my bag, drove home to shower and change, then returned for the 7 a.m. board meeting that had been hastily called after my late-night email to Centauri's legal department. At 6:59 a.m., I walked into the boardroom where the entire executive team sat looking confused and irritated at the early hour. I connected my laptop to the projector and displayed a single slide. Asset seizure clause, cross, default. The CFO Richard's face went white as paper. That's when I knew I had them. The boardroom fell silent as I stood before the projection. Richard's complexion continued to drain of color, while CEO Melissa looked confused. "Nancy, what is this about?" she asked, glancing at her watch. "We have a call with Centauri's legal team in 15 minutes, and we need to prepare." "That's exactly why I'm here," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "I'm the reason Centauri's legal team wants to talk." Richard suddenly found his voice. "This is completely inappropriate. You aren't authorized to be in this meeting." "Actually," I countered, "as the primary relationship manager for the Centauri account, I'm precisely the person who should be here." I took a deep breath, especially since I'm the one who alerted them to potential contract violations. The words hung in the air like a live grenade. Board members exchanged nervous glances while Frank's face flushed crimson. "You did what?" he sputtered. I never got to answer because at that moment my phone buzzed with a text from Centauri's legal counsel. "Meeting postponed. Initiating full contract audit. Maintain all records." I showed the message to the room, then quietly gathered my things. "I believe you all have some preparing to do. I'll see myself out." That afternoon, I received a terse email placing me on administrative leave with pay, pending investigation into potential policy violations. They had locked me out of the building but forgotten to disable my VPN access, a critical oversight I had anticipated. Sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by printed copies of key documents I'd secured before being locked out, I felt the full weight of what I'd done. My career at TechSphere was effectively over. 10 years of my professional life potentially burned to ashes. Yet underneath the anxiety, something else stirred a sense of righteous indignation that grew stronger by the hour. I called my mentor Jill from legal, who was nearing retirement and had always been straight with me. "Can you meet for coffee? Off the record." 2 hours later, we sat in a quiet corner of a cafe 3 towns over, well away from any potential TechSphere ears. "You've kicked the hornet's nest," Jill said without preamble. "Richard is on the warpath." "They publicly humiliated me after I saved the company," I replied. "Then I found evidence they deliberately manipulated my performance review to justify denying my promised compensation." Jill sighed deeply. "There's more going on than you know, Nancy. Financial irregularities have been piling up for months. The numbers don't add up between what we report to investors and what we tell employees." This revelation sent a chill through me. "What kind of irregularities?" "Nothing I can prove definitively," she said, lowering her voice further, "but enough to make me accelerate my retirement plans. The Centauri deal bought the company time, but they're burning through that cash at an alarming rate." Over the next week, I began a methodical investigation of every company financial record I could legally access. TechSphere was a publicly traded company, which meant quarterly reports, annual statements, and investor presentations were all available online. I created spreadsheets comparing the rosy picture painted for shareholders with the austerity narrative fed to employees. The pattern was unmistakable. While claiming inability to fulfill compensation promises to staff, the company reported strong profits and growing cash reserves to Wall Street. Executive bonuses had doubled, and a new corporate retreat facility was purchased in Aspen. More disturbing was what I discovered about the Centauri contract itself. In our eagerness to secure the deal, we had agreed to unusual terms, including allowing Centauri to provide $15 million as an advance against future deliverables. Essentially, TechSphere had borrowed heavily from our own client, creating a dependency that went far beyond a normal vendor relationship. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues, only to find most distanced themselves from me, fearful of association with someone clearly on management's bad side. Only Alex, from engineering, maintained contact, calling from a personal phone after hours. "They're scrubbing documentation," he whispered during one call. "Anything related to the Centauri deliverables is being revised retroactively." "Can you send me examples?" I asked. "Too risky. But I can tell you they're showing Centauri one set of progress reports and keeping another internally. The gap between what we're promising and what we're delivering is growing." This information sent me down another research rabbit hole. Late into the night, I studied contract law and corporate finance, trying to understand the full implications of what TechSphere was doing. The cross-default clause began to make more sense. It was essentially a tripwire that could trigger cascading consequences across multiple agreements if certain conditions were breached. During my third sleepless night, I stumbled across something I'd missed in my initial review of public documents. The quarterly investor report contained financial figures that directly contradicted what employees had been told during the all-hands meeting. While we heard about necessary belt-tightening and sacrifice, investors were assured of record profitability and generous dividend increases. Most damning of all was the disclosure of executive compensation, buried in the appendices. The same day Veronica announced my salary freeze for setting unrealistic expectations, Richard, the CFO, received a $2 million retention bonus. Frank, my unsupportive boss, saw his stock options accelerated to the tune of $750,000. I printed these pages and added them to my growing file, hands shaking, not with fear now, but with rage. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systematic, calculated, and affected hundreds of dedicated employees who trusted leadership to act with basic decency and integrity. The question was, what could I actually do about it? As one mid-level manager against an entrenched executive team with limitless legal resources, my options seemed limited. But then I remembered the Centauri contract again, particularly the cross-default provisions that my attorney friend had called nuclear. I pulled out the relevant sections and began to truly understand the leverage I might have. If TechSphere was indeed deceiving Centauri about deliverable timelines while spending their advance payment elsewhere, there were serious contractual and potentially legal consequences. The cross-default clause meant that a breach of the Centauri agreement could trigger defaults in our other financing arrangements as well, essentially a corporate house of cards that could collapse with one wrong move. It wasn't just about my salary anymore. It was about an entire system of deception that needed exposure before more damage was done. With renewed purpose, I organized my findings and prepared for the next phase of my investigation, one that would require me to reach beyond the safety of public documents and into the murky waters of internal communications I was no longer supposed to access. 2 weeks into my administrative leave, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by methodical determination. My dining room now resembled an investigator's war room laptop surrounded by stacks of highlighted documents, whiteboards covered with timelines, and sticky notes connecting key events. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening at TechSphere, which meant talking to someone who had experienced similar treatment. Brooke Thomas had been a product director who abruptly left 6 months ago without explanation. We weren't close, but I'd always respected her work ethic and integrity. After some hesitation, Brooke agreed to meet at a hiking trail outside the city. We walked slowly along the path, far from potential eavesdroppers. "I wondered if you'd eventually call," she said after I explained my situation. "They did the same thing to me last year." "The performance review manipulation?" I asked. "That and more." I questioned some financial decisions after noticing discrepancies in the project budgets I oversaw. 2 weeks later, I was being written up for communication issues and failing to meet expectations, despite having exceeding all targets for 3 years straight. Brooke stopped walking and faced me directly. Then I found evidence that Richard was shifting R&D funds to artificially inflate quarterly earnings. When I brought it to Melissa, she thanked me for my concern and promised to look into it. 3 days later, HR called me in and offered 6 months severance to resign quietly. "You took it," I observed. "I have 2 kids in college and a mortgage. Fighting would have blacklisted me in the industry." She resumed walking, but I've regretted it every day since. Her story confirmed my suspicions, but I needed legal expertise to understand my options. I called my law school friend Stephanie, now a partner specializing in corporate litigation at a firm across town. "This cross-default provision is fascinating," Stephanie said, examining the contract sections I'd highlighted during our confidential consultation. "Essentially, if TechSphere defaults on the Centauri agreement, it triggers automatic default on your company's other financing arrangements. It's like knocking over the first domino." What constitutes a default? I asked. Several things. She pointed to specific clauses. Failure to meet contractually defined milestones, material misrepresentation of capabilities or deliverable status, misuse of advance payments, financial insolvency. She looked up at me. If what you're telling me is accurate, TechSphere could be in violation of at least 2 of these conditions. And the consequences? Severe. Centauri could demand immediate repayment of their $15 million advance. But the cross-default is where it gets truly painful. That would trigger clauses in your company's other financing, potentially forcing immediate repayment of all outstanding loans. Few companies keep enough liquid capital to handle that kind of cash demand. The implications were staggering. If TechSphere had indeed been misrepresenting their progress to Centauri while diverting funds to executive compensation and perks, they were sitting on a financial time bomb. What's my liability if I alert Centauri? I asked. That depends on your employment contract and confidentiality agreements. As the relationship manager for their account, you have certain ethical obligations to both your employer and the client. It's a gray area legally. Stephanie tapped her pen thoughtfully. I'd need to review your specific agreements before advising further action. That evening, I dug through my home files and found my original employment contract plus subsequent confidentiality agreements. Nothing specifically prevented me from reporting potential fraud or contractual violations, especially those I discovered through public documents. The next morning, I received a text from Alex. They're asking it to monitor your computer access. Be careful. Too late. I realized I'd been using my VPN credentials to access non-sensitive company resources during my investigation. While legal, it signaled to management that I wasn't simply accepting my situation. I immediately changed tactics, focusing solely on information available through public channels. Days later, I was called in for a meeting with Human Resources. Janice, the HR director, sat across from me with a sympathetic expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Nancy, we're concerned about your recent activities," she began. "There are questions about your access to company systems while on leave." "I've accessed nothing confidential," I replied calmly. "Just the resources any relationship manager would need to maintain client awareness. Nevertheless, there's a perception that you're not being a team player during this review period." "A team player?" I echoed, momentarily losing my composure. I saved this company with the Centauri contract, only to be publicly humiliated and have my promised compensation redirected to executive bonuses. Which team exactly am I supposed to be playing for? Janice's professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing discomfort. "These allegations are serious, Nancy. Do you have evidence to support them?" I simply smiled. "Is this meeting being documented in my personnel file?" "Of course." "Then please record that I categorically deny any wrongdoing and believe I have been targeted for retaliatory action after questioning financial discrepancies. I reserve all rights to pursue this matter through appropriate channels." The formal language clearly caught her off guard. The meeting ended shortly after, with Janice promising to circle back after consulting with leadership. That evening, Alex called again. "They've asked IT to prepare termination protocols for you. Full system lockout, email account closure, the works. Something big is happening." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning. There's more. They're accelerating the next Centauri progress report. I've seen the draft, and Nancy, it's fiction. We're nowhere near those milestones." After hanging up, I sat staring at my investigation wall. The pieces were falling into place. TechSphere wasn't just manipulating internal performance reviews to avoid paying promised compensation. They were actively misrepresenting project status to Centauri while spending the advance payment on executive enrichment. In a moment of clarity, I realized I needed to preserve evidence before losing access. Working through the night, I carefully documented everything I could legally access, focusing particularly on the contractual milestones TechSphere claimed to have met with Centauri. At 4 a.m, I found the smoking gun buried in a shared project repository I still had access to. An internal status report dated just 3 days earlier showed TechSphere had failed to deliver several contractually obligated milestones to Centauri, while simultaneously preparing external progress reports showing all deliverables on track. This wasn't just unethical business practice, it was potentially fraud. The company had taken $15 million from Centauri as an advance against deliverables they knew they couldn't produce on schedule, then diverted those funds to other purposes while actively concealing the truth. With this discovery, the stakes had changed entirely. This wasn't just about my salary freeze or personal betrayal anymore. It was about stopping a company-wide deception before Centauri and other clients lost millions more. I saved the documents to an encrypted drive, printed key pages, and prepared for what would likely be my final move in this corporate chess game. The cross-default provision wasn't just leverage. It was now my responsibility to activate. By the 4-week mark of my administrative leave, the personal toll had become impossible to ignore. My normally manageable migraines had intensified to debilitating episodes that left me lying in darkened rooms for hours. Sleep eluded me most nights, and when exhaustion finally claimed me, anxiety-filled dreams jolted me awake before dawn. I'd lost 11 pounds from my already slim frame, my clothes hanging loosely as a physical manifestation of the stress consuming me. My boyfriend, Dan, initially supportive, had grown increasingly frustrated with my single-minded focus on the investigation. "You need to let this go, Nancy," he said during another dinner I barely touched. "File a wrongful termination lawsuit if you have to, but this obsession isn't healthy. It's been a month, and you still spend every waking moment surrounded by those documents." "They're going to fire me tomorrow?" I replied, pushing food around my plate. Alex confirmed it. "Then take the severance and move on. You're brilliant, any company would be lucky to have you." I looked up at him, suddenly aware of the fundamental disconnect between us. "This isn't just about my job anymore, Dan. TechSphere is defrauding Centauri and lying to investors. People's livelihoods and retirement funds are at stake. And that's your responsibility because?" he challenged, frustration evident. "Because I'm the one who knows. Because I brought Centauri into this mess with my pitch. Because sometimes doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing." Dan shook his head. "I don't recognize you anymore. This crusade is consuming everything. Your health, our relationship, your future." His words stung with their partial truth. I had become singularly focused, perhaps to an unhealthy degree. But beneath the obsession lay a certainty I couldn't ignore. If I walked away, I would be complicit in the very system of deception and exploitation I was fighting against. That night, alone in bed after Dan left to get some space, the doubts crept in. Was I really pursuing justice, or was this elaborate payback for my wounded pride? Was I overreacting to standard corporate politics? Had I manufactured connections between unrelated events to create a conspiracy where none existed? The spiral of self-doubt was interrupted by a text from an unknown number. Memorial Park. "Bench near the east entrance. Noon tomorrow. Come alone. J. Jill." My legal mentor, who had been conspicuously silent since our coffee shop meeting. The next morning, I arrived at the park 30 minutes early, positioning myself where I could observe the meeting spot without being immediately visible. At precisely noon, Jill appeared, looking nervously over her shoulder before sitting down. I approached casually and sat beside her. "I thought you'd decided to stay out of this." "I did," she replied, not looking at me. "Then I found this." She slid a USB drive into my coat pocket. "I've been collecting evidence of financial misconduct for over 2 years. Planned to turn it over after retirement when they couldn't touch my pension. But they're accelerating their timeline. People need to know now. What's happening? The board is being misled along with everyone else. Richard and his inner circle have been manipulating financial statements, inflating projections, and hiding losses. The Centauri contract bought them time, but they're burning through that cash at an unsustainable rate. Why tell me this now?" Jill finally turned to face me, her expression grave. "Because they're not just planning to fire you, Nancy. They're building a case to sue you for breach of contract and corporate espionage. They want to make an example of you to silence anyone else who might speak up." The news hit me like a physical blow. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming you stole proprietary information and attempted to share it with competitors. It's fabricated, of course, but they're planting digital evidence. Your company laptop, which you returned, they've been modifying access logs." My mind raced. "That's why they haven't terminated my credentials yet. They're creating a trail." Jill nodded. "Exactly. You need to protect yourself before they spring this trap." After our meeting, I headed straight to the whistleblower hotline TechSphere had established as part of their corporate governance. I spent hours carefully documenting everything I'd found, providing specific examples of financial misrepresentation and contractual violations. 3 days later, I logged in to check the status of my report. It had vanished from the system without a trace. That evening, my apartment transformed from investigation headquarters to legal defense command center. I researched whistleblower protections, employment law, and corporate governance regulations. I called Stephanie for another consultation, this time bringing copies of everything I had collected. "They're escalating faster than I expected," she said after reviewing my materials. "Filing a retaliatory lawsuit would be an aggressive move, especially with the evidence you've gathered." "What's my best defense?" I asked. "Offense," she replied without hesitation. "They're counting on you being isolated, frightened, and overwhelmed. You need to change the dynamics by bringing in outside parties with real authority. Centauri? Eventually, but not first. They have their own interests to protect and might settle privately with TechSphere. You need regulatory oversight that can't be quieted with money." The conversation shifted to strategic planning, which agencies might have jurisdiction, what evidence would be most compelling, and how to protect myself legally while pursuing accountability. As Stephanie left, she paused at the door. "Nancy, are you sure you want to go down this road? Once you start this process, there's no turning back. Your career in this industry could be affected regardless of the outcome." I thought about everything I'd sacrificed already: my health, my relationship with Dan, my sense of security. I'm sure some things matter more than career advancement. That night, as I organized the growing documentation, I accidentally opened a folder on the USB drive I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a draft of a company restructuring plan dated for the following quarter. I froze as I read the details. TechSphere was planning to eliminate 40% of staff immediately after securing new funding based partly on the success of the Centauri implementation. My department was listed first for workforce optimization, scheduled just 2 weeks after the next board meeting. The document included talking points for managing potential reputation impact of the mass layoff including emphasizing necessary strategic realignment rather than acknowledging financial distress. The discovery solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about my salary or even the Centauri fraud. It was about hundreds of colleagues who would soon lose their livelihoods while executives continued enriching themselves. The system needed exposure before more damage could be done. I stayed up until dawn, meticulously creating a secure backup of all evidence and developing a comprehensive action plan. By the time the sun rose, I had clarity about my next steps. The cross-default provision in the Centauri contract wasn't just leverage, it was the key to forcing accountability before the planned restructuring could be implemented. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of purpose that transcended my personal grievances. This was about justice for every employee who had been manipulated and every investor who had been misled. The path forward was clear, though fraught with risk. I closed my eyes, finally ready for a few hours of genuine rest. Tomorrow would bring either vindication or professional suicide, but either way, the truth would emerge. The morning after my discovery of the restructuring plan, I began implementing a comprehensive strategy. First, I created a secure system for documenting every interaction related to TechSphere, a voice recording app for legal conversations in my one-party consent state, detailed written logs of all communications, and multiple backups of evidence stored in different secure locations. I pulled out the Centauri contract again, this time focusing exclusively on Section 27.4, the Asset Seizure Clause. Its dense legal language had initially seemed like standard boilerplate, but now revealed itself as an extraordinary protection mechanism. In the event of material misrepresentation of deliverable status or substantial deviation from contracted milestone timelines without proper notification and mutual agreement, Centauri Systems reserves the right to invoke immediate default provisions, including but not limited to repayment of all advance funds with applicable penalties, seizure of developed intellectual property as collateral against outstanding obligations, and exercise of cross-default provisions as detailed in Appendix C. Appendix C spelled out the cross-default mechanism in excruciating detail. If TechSphere defaulted on the Centauri agreement, it would automatically trigger default provisions in the company's primary credit facility with National First Bank, which in turn would trigger defaults in subsidiary financing arrangements, equipment leases, and the corporate headquarters mortgage. The cascading effect would force TechSphere to either immediately produce over $60 million in cash or face asset seizures across multiple fronts simultaneously. For a company secretly burning through its reserves while maintaining a facade of prosperity, this would be catastrophic. Understanding the nuclear power of this clause was one thing. Wielding it responsibly was another. I needed absolute certainty that TechSphere was indeed in violation of the contract terms before proceeding. That meant gathering evidence directly from Centauri about their understanding of project status. I reached out to Samuel, my primary contact at Centauri, requesting a coffee meeting under the guise of a casual project update. We met at a quiet cafe far from both our offices. "Nancy, good to see you," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Though I'm confused, I was told you're on leave from TechSphere. Are you back now?" "Not exactly," I replied carefully. "I'm still technically employed, but not currently active on projects. I wanted to check in personally because I care deeply about our partnership." Samuel looked uncomfortable. "Well, to be honest, there have been some concerns lately. The last 2 progress reports showed all milestones on track, but our technical team has noticed significant gaps in the actual deliverables." "What kind of gaps?" I asked, maintaining a neutral expression while my heart pounded. Features marked as completed that don't actually function. Back-end infrastructure that doesn't meet our performance requirements. Security implementations that fail our penetration testing. He shook his head. When we've raised these issues, we get reassurances, but no substantive corrections. This confirmed what Alex had told me about the falsified progress reports. I carefully steered the conversation to the advance payment. Has TechSphere provided accounting for how the advance funds are being utilized for project development? Samuel's expression darkened. They were supposed to provide quarterly expenditure reports, but the last two have been suspiciously vague. Our finance team has requested clarification multiple times. By the end of our hour-long conversation, I had confirmation of at least 3 material contractual violations, each sufficient to trigger the default provisions. But I needed more than verbal confirmation. I needed documentation. Samuel, would it be possible for Centauri to provide formal documentation of these concerns? It would help me understand the complete picture as I consider my next steps professionally. He hesitated. I can't share confidential communications, but our project management office did compile an issues log for internal use. I could forward you the non-proprietary summary. That afternoon, Samuel sent the document a devastating 12-page assessment of TechSphere's failure to meet contractual obligations, complete with time-stamped evidence and technical evaluations. With this critical piece secured, I began building a network of potential allies without revealing my full strategy. I reconnected with former colleagues who had left TechSphere under suspicious circumstances, carefully documenting their experiences of financial manipulation and retribution against those who asked questions. I consulted with an employment attorney about whistleblower protections, a different specialist regarding potential shareholder actions, and a former SEC enforcement officer about the regulatory implications of TechSphere's financial reporting discrepancies. Each conversation added another layer of understanding and protection to my plan. I wasn't just building a case against TechSphere, I was creating a safety net for the aftermath. Whatever happened, I needed to ensure that truth would prevail, even if the company marshaled its considerable resources against me. The technical aspects of the cross-default mechanism required particular attention. I created a flowchart, tracking all the interconnected financing arrangements that would be affected, estimating the total financial exposure TechSphere would face if the provision were triggered. Late one evening, I received another call from Alex. They're planning to terminate you first thing Monday morning. The paperwork includes allegations of corporate espionage and breach of confidentiality. They've prepared a press release painting you as a disgruntled employee who attempted to damage the company after being passed over for promotion. This accelerated my timeline. Thanks for the warning. Is there anything else I should know? Just one thing. Jordan from Finance asked me strange questions about you today. Wanted to know if we still kept in touch, if you'd mentioned anything about the company finances. It seemed like he was fishing, but not in the way management would want. Jordan was Richard's executive assistant, someone with direct access to the CFO's communications and financial dealings. If he was asking questions about me, it could signal either another trap or a potential ally. The next day, I received an encrypted email from an anonymous account. Need to talk. Concerned about what I'm seeing. Can we meet? J. After careful security precautions, including having Stephanie wait nearby as insurance, I met Jordan in a public park. He looked nervous, constantly scanning our surroundings. I can't stay long, he said immediately, but I need to give you something. He handed me a thumb drive. Financial records Richard doesn't know I've accessed. Documented proof that he's been systematically manipulating reports, diverting funds, and lying to the board. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because it's wrong," he said simply. "I went into finance because I believe in accountability and transparency. What they're doing violates everything I stand for professionally. And the way they've treated you after everything you've done for the company." He shook his head. "It's unconscionable." Jordan explained that he'd been compiling evidence for months, increasingly disturbed by what he was witnessing, but unsure what to do. "When I heard how they were planning to destroy your reputation, I knew I had to act." The thumb drive contained documented proof of deliberate financial manipulation, altered board presentations, 2 sets of books for different audiences, and explicit emails discussing how to conceal the company's true financial position from investors and employees alike. That night, Stephanie came to my apartment for a final strategy session. We spent hours reviewing all the evidence, organizing it into a compelling narrative, and preparing for various scenarios that might unfold. "Once you initiate contact with Centauri's legal department, there's no turning back," she warned. "Are you absolutely certain this is the path you want to take?" I looked at the wall of evidence I'd assembled, thought about the hundreds of employees facing unexpected termination, and considered the investors being systematically misled. "I'm certain," I replied. "Some lines shouldn't be crossed, no matter the personal cost." At exactly midnight, I sent a carefully crafted email to Centauri's chief legal officer, copying their CEO and board chairman. The subject line was simple: urgent contractual violation. Notice: Centauri divided by TechSphere Agreement, Section 27.4. The email was factual, precise, and devastating, laying out documented evidence of TechSphere's material misrepresentations while providing specific contract references. I included Samuel's issues log, financial documentation showing misuse of the advance payment, and time-stamped proof of falsified progress reports. The final paragraph was the trigger. "As the designated relationship manager for this account, I am formally notifying Centauri Systems of these violations pursuant to my ethical obligations under both our agreement and applicable regulations. I respectfully request an emergency meeting with all relevant parties to address these issues before they escalate further." At 1:30 in the morning, my phone rang Centauri's chief legal officer herself. "Miss Anderson, we've reviewed your email and supporting documentation. The board has called an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. Your presence is requested." I hung up and stared at the ceiling, adrenaline coursing through my veins. In less than 6 hours, I would either achieve accountability or destroy my career. Either way, the truth would finally emerge. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I meticulously prepared my presentation, organizing evidence into clear sections, with irrefutable documentation for each claim. By 5 a.m., I had created 30 precise slides that told the complete story of TechSphere's deception and contractual violations. My final preparation was personal: a shower, professional attire, and a moment of quiet reflection. In the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. 4 weeks of stress had left me noticeably thinner, with dark circles under my eyes. But there was something else, too. A steadiness, a certainty that hadn't been there before. I arrived at Centauri headquarters at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Security had been notified to expect me, and I was escorted directly to their executive boardroom where several people were already gathered, speaking in hushed tones. Centauri's CEO, Thomas Green, nodded grimly as I entered. "Miss Anderson, a challenging situation you've brought to our attention." "Yes, sir. I wish the circumstances were different." "As do we all," he replied. TechSphere's representatives should be arriving shortly. Their entire executive team and several board members are attending. At precisely 6:59 a.m., the TechSphere contingent entered the room. CEO Melissa led the group, followed by CFO Richard, my boss Frank, the board chairman, and 4 other board members. Their expressions ranged from confusion to barely concealed fury when they spotted me. Richard immediately objected to my presence. "This is highly inappropriate. Miss Anderson is currently on administrative leave, pending termination for serious policy violations. She has no standing to participate in this discussion." Thomas Green responded with cool professionalism. "Mr. Harper, Miss Anderson is here at our explicit request as the individual who brought these contractual concerns to our attention. Her standing in this meeting is not yours to determine." The Centauri legal team outlined the agenda presentation of alleged contractual violations, TechSphere's response, and discussion of remediation options. Then Thomas nodded to me. "Miss Anderson, please proceed with your presentation." I connected my laptop to the projector and displayed the first slide: Asset Seizure Clause, Cross, Default, Documentation of Contract Violations. Richard's face went white as he realized what was happening. Melissa looked confused, while several board members leaned forward with sudden intensity. "Over the past 4 weeks," I began calmly, "I have documented systematic violations of our contractual obligations to Centauri Systems, including deliberate misrepresentation of deliverable status, misuse of advance payments, and failure to meet contractually defined milestones while reporting full compliance." For the next 30 minutes, I presented a comprehensive case built on incontrovertible evidence, internal emails showing knowledge of missed milestones while reporting completion, financial records demonstrating diversion of Centauri's advance payment to executive compensation and unrelated expenses, and technical documentation proving the delivered functionality failed to meet contractual requirements. Throughout my presentation, Richard repeatedly attempted to interrupt, his face flushing deeper red with each slide. "This is absurd," he finally exploded when I paused between sections. "These are selectively edited documents taken out of context by a disgruntled employee passed over for promotion. The board should not give this theatrical performance any credibility." I remained calm. Every document presented has complete metadata and authentication. Nothing has been edited. If Mr. Harper believes any document is misrepresented, I invite him to identify specific inaccuracies rather than making general accusations. TechSphere's board chairman Gerald Wilson spoke for the first time, his voice measured but intense. "Miss Anderson, are you alleging that our CFO deliberately misrepresented our financial position and project status to both Centauri and our own board?" "I'm not alleging anything, Mr. Wilson. I'm presenting documented evidence of what occurred. The emails and financial records speak for themselves." I continued to my final slides, which outlined the cross-default mechanism and its potential consequences. Section 27.4 of our agreement, the Asset Seizure Clause, gives Centauri the right to demand immediate repayment of the $15 million advance with penalties. More significantly, it triggers the cross-default provisions in Appendix C, which would cascade to TechSphere's primary credit facility and subsidiary financing arrangements. The room fell completely silent as the full implications became clear. TechSphere would face immediate financial obligations exceeding $60 million money they simply didn't have available. "This is corporate blackmail," Richard sputtered, his composure completely abandoned. She's threatening the company's very existence over a personal grievance about compensation. Actually, I countered, displaying my final slide, this is about protecting Centauri's interests, TechSphere's employees, and our shareholders from the consequences of financial mismanagement and contractual violations. I've prepared 3 potential remediation paths that would address the violations without triggering the default provisions. The board members leaned forward as I outlined practical solutions that would require significant changes in financial practices, executive accountability, and project management, but would preserve the company and the partnership with Centauri. As I concluded, CEO Melissa finally spoke, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Miss Anderson, why didn't you bring these concerns to me directly before escalating to Centauri? With respect, Miss Davis, I attempted to address concerns through proper channels. After the public salary freeze claiming performance issues despite saving the company with the Centauri contract, I discovered evidence that my performance review was deliberately manipulated to justify denying promised compensation. When I questioned this, I was immediately placed on administrative leave and targeted for termination with false allegations of corporate espionage." The board members exchanged alarmed glances. Clearly, they hadn't been informed of these details. Gerald Wilson turned to Richard. "Is this accurate? Was Miss Anderson's performance review altered as she claims?" Richard began a convoluted explanation about holistic performance assessment and leadership concerns, but was interrupted by a quiet voice from the back of the room. "It's true." Jordan, Richard's assistant, stood up from where he had been sitting quietly. "I have copies of the original performance review and the altered version, Mr. Harper instructed me to substitute. I also have the email directing finance to reallocate Miss Anderson's promised compensation to the executive retreat budget." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. 2 TechSphere board members I didn't recognize exchanged glances before one of them spoke. "Mr. Chairman, Barbara Chen, and I have actually had concerns about financial reporting inconsistencies for the past 2 quarters, but lacked concrete evidence to justify a formal investigation. Miss Anderson's presentation confirms our suspicions and provides the documentation we've been seeking." Barbara nodded. "We'd like to move for an immediate, independent audit of all financial statements and executive actions for the past 12 months, with Miss Anderson's evidence as the starting point." Richard exploded, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "This is a coordinated attack! She's colluding with board members now? This is outrageous!" The chairman silenced him with a raised hand. "Mr. Harper, these are serious allegations with substantial documentation. Your reaction is not helping your credibility." For the next hour, the meeting transformed into a detailed examination of TechSphere's financial practices and executive decisions. Centauri's representatives made it clear that while they valued the partnership, they required immediate corrective action and complete transparency moving forward. By 10 a.m., the TechSphere board had reached a decision. Chairman Wilson addressed the room. "In light of the evidence presented, the board is taking immediate action. Mr. Harper and any executives directly implicated in financial misrepresentation will be placed on administrative leave pending a complete independent investigation. Miss Anderson's termination proceedings are hereby canceled, and a full review of her treatment will be conducted." He turned to me directly. "Miss Anderson, the board recognizes the courage it took to bring these issues forward despite the personal and professional risks. We owe you our gratitude for preventing what could have become a catastrophic situation for all stakeholders." As the meeting concluded, I felt a complex mixture of vindication, relief, and exhaustion. The path forward would not be easy, but truth had prevailed over deception, and accountability had finally arrived at TechSphere's executive floor. The 3 months following that pivotal boardroom confrontation brought sweeping changes to TechSphere. The independent audit confirmed everything I had presented and uncovered additional financial irregularities dating back 18 months. CFO Richard and 3 of his allies were terminated for cause after the investigation revealed systematic manipulation of financial reporting and misuse of company resources. During that period, I worked closely with the board's audit committee, providing complete access to my documentation and walking them through the complex web of deception I had uncovered. What began as a personal response to injustice evolved into a comprehensive reform of company governance and culture. CEO Melissa survived the initial purge, but found herself under heightened scrutiny. Her claims of ignorance regarding the financial manipulation were technically accepted, but her leadership was fundamentally questioned. A CEO who doesn't know is only marginally better than one who participates, as one board member put it during a closed session I later heard about. The restructuring plan targeting 40% of employees was immediately scrapped. Instead, the company adopted a transparent approach to its financial challenges, implementing targeted cost reductions that protected the workforce while eliminating wasteful executive perks. The Aspen Retreat property was sold, executive compensation was realigned with industry standards, and a new profit-sharing program was extended to all employees. My former boss Frank attempted to rewrite history, claiming he had secretly supported my efforts all along. Few believed him. When the dust settled, he accepted a career opportunity with a smaller competitor, effectively a demotion wrapped in face-saving language. Perhaps the most surprising development was the board's approach to my situation. Rather than the quiet settlement I expected, they made a public commitment to reformed governance, explicitly acknowledging the retaliation I had faced and establishing new whistleblower protections with external oversight. The Anderson Principles, as they became known internally, established clear ethical guidelines for financial reporting, performance evaluation, and compensation practices. Every executive was required to complete ethics training incorporating case studies based on the documented manipulation I had uncovered. Personally, the vindication came with unexpected challenges. Colleagues who had distanced themselves during my administrative leave now sought connection, often with awkward explanations for their earlier abandonment. I accepted their overtures with grace, but maintained healthy boundaries, now clearly seeing the difference between workplace relationships and genuine friendship. My boyfriend Dan called repeatedly, wanting to reconcile. During our final conversation, I realized how profoundly the experience had changed me. "I understand why you stepped back," I told him over coffee. "You were right that I was obsessed, and it wasn't healthy. But you were wrong about what mattered. Sometimes principles have to come before comfort, even when the cost is high." "I see that now," he admitted. "You showed incredible courage. I should have supported you." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But the experience clarified what I need in a partner. Someone who believes in me when the evidence isn't all available, who stands with me when the path gets difficult." We parted amicably, both recognizing we wanted different things from relationships and life. 6 months after the confrontation, TechSphere held a company-wide meeting to announce a reorganization. The board chairman introduced a new executive leadership team, including a highly respected CFO recruited from a larger technology firm known for ethical practices. Then came the announcement that caught me completely by surprise. "Finally, we are pleased to announce the creation of a new executive position, Chief Operating Officer, with responsibility for operational integrity, client relationships, and ethical business practices. After an extensive search, the board unanimously selected someone whose demonstrated commitment to these principles is unquestionable. Please join me in congratulating Nancy Anderson on her new role as TechSphere's first COO and newest board member. The applause was genuine and sustained as I walked to the podium, still processing this unexpected development. When I had fought against the salary freeze and exposed the financial manipulation, I never imagined it would lead to an executive leadership position. My acceptance speech was brief, but heartfelt. Thank you for this trust. What happened at TechSphere wasn't just about financial misrepresentation or my personal situation. It was about the gap between our stated values and our actual practices. My commitment is to close that gap permanently, creating a company where integrity isn't just a word in our mission statement, but a reality in our daily operations. The Centauri relationship, nearly destroyed by the previous management's deception, flourished under the new approach. We renegotiated the contract with complete transparency, establishing realistic timelines and honest progress reporting. Samuel, my contact who had provided crucial documentation, became a trusted partner rather than an adversary to be misled. "You know what impressed us most?" he told me during a project review. "Not that you found the contract violation, though that was certainly eye-opening, but that you offered solutions rather than just leveraging the default provisions to punish TechSphere. That showed real leadership." The transformation extended beyond governance and operations to the company culture itself. Team members who had previously kept their heads down, afraid to question decisions or raise concerns, found their voices in the new environment. Innovation flourished as artificial barriers between departments dissolved, replaced by collaborative approaches focused on client value rather than internal politics. My own transformation was equally profound. The experience had stripped away any naivety about corporate dynamics while reinforcing my core belief in the power of principled action. I developed a deeper understanding of systems and structures that enable both ethical and unethical behavior in organizations. Knowledge I applied to rebuilding TechSphere's approach to everything from performance evaluation to financial reporting. 1 year after the fateful all-hands meeting where my salary was publicly frozen, I stood at the same podium addressing a very different company. The quarterly results showed steady growth built on sustainable practices rather than financial manipulation. Employee satisfaction scores had reached record highs, and client retention exceeded industry benchmarks. "Our journey this past year hasn't been easy," I told the assembled team. "Transforming a company culture requires everyone's participation and patience. But the results speak for themselves, not just in financial terms, but in the kind of organization we're building together. One where contributions are recognized, integrity is rewarded, and success is shared." That evening, I sat in my office reflecting on the remarkable journey. The salary freeze that once seemed like a devastating personal betrayal had ultimately triggered a complete reset of TechSphere's direction and my own career. The cross-default provision I had activated as a desperate measure of accountability had become a catalyst for meaningful change, affecting hundreds of lives positively. The most valuable lesson wasn't about contract clauses or financial regulations, though understanding those had been crucial. It was about courage, the willingness to stand alone when necessary, to speak truth despite the personal cost, and to offer solutions rather than just identifying problems. In the months that followed, I began speaking at industry conferences about ethical leadership and corporate governance, sharing the TechSphere case study, with appropriate anonymization, as a cautionary tale and roadmap for reform. Business schools incorporated the story into their ethics curriculum, and several industry associations revised their best practices based on the specific mechanisms of financial manipulation we had uncovered and corrected. My office now includes a small framed document, a copy of that original slide that made the CFO's face go white. Asset seizure clause, cross, default. It serves as a daily reminder that systems designed to protect organizational interests can also enforce accountability when properly understood and applied. Today, as I welcome new employees during orientation, I share a simplified version of this story, emphasizing not the dramatic confrontation, but the principles that emerged from it. At TechSphere, we believe understanding creates power, integrity creates trust, and courage creates change, I tell them. Your value here will never be measured by your willingness to remain silent when something seems wrong. It will be measured by your contribution to building something worthy of your talent and dedication. The journey from product manager to COO has taught me that organizational systems are only as ethical as the people who design and operate them. Financial mechanisms, performance evaluations, and compensation structures are not neutral tools. They reflect and reinforce values, whether consciously chosen or unconsciously accepted. By understanding the systems deeply enough to see their leverage points, like that cross-default clause in a complex contract, we gain the power to ensure they serve legitimate purposes, rather than enabling exploitation. This knowledge isn't just for executives or legal specialists. It belongs to everyone who wants to work in environments where contribution and integrity align with recognition and reward. Have you ever stood alone against a system that seemed too powerful to change? What gave you the courage to continue when others advised compromise? I'd love to hear your stories of principled stands and unexpected outcomes in the comments below. And if you found value in this journey of accountability and transformation, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories of courage in everyday settings, and share with someone navigating their own challenging workplace situation. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, understanding the rules completely can sometimes be the most powerful form of change.